Hello, Rose.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you really well. How
Fan
am I coming through?
yeah, I'm hearing you well too. I'm just going to see stream. Does it sound well to you guys as well? Does it sound good? Just gonna make sure this is all well and good before we start, so that we don't run into any issues later. He sounds a bit distant. He could be a little bit louder, a bit distant.
How about now?
I
I
can
mean,
move it. I can move you up. Otherwise, let's see. Da da da. All right. This should be better. All right. Well, if it's just a little bit, if it's just a little bit too quiet, you can just let me know if it's still quiet. But I've turned it up a bit, so but it should be fine. Okay. So we're here to discuss the Rhineland model, and comparing it to worker cooperatives, in in also different ways. So I did some research about the Rhineland model, and from the research I've encountered, it's not really. Correct me, of course, if I'm incorrect. It's not like a specific model in itself. It's more like an umbrella term for more regulated economies in general. Is that correct, or?
yeah, I would say so. So it is a economic framework, sort of a competitive model to the Anglo-Saxon neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm.
The main idea is that to put a catchphrase on it, they call it the stakeholders model instead of the stockholders model, meaning that they sort of try to identify and debate who are the main stakeholders in certain markets and make sure they have power and say in how it is structured, while at the same time making sure that while the capitalist model of growth and investment and well, mainly economic growth is maintained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I read this, the main example they brought up, that I saw in connection to this mostly was Germany's economy, and other northwestern European economies, except for the United Kingdom. Though I think that they fall more on the liberal, Anglo-Saxon side of their economics. But when I read this, this all sounds, especially if you're looking at it from an American framework, all of this absolutely sounds like a step upward and an improvement from a lot of the traditional firms, or classical firms or whatever that you see in the United States, and the way their economy is structured in general. And I would absolutely say that if you're still falling on the Anglo-Saxon side, that yeah, probably moving towards a Rhineland model would be beneficial. However, I don't necessarily think it has to stop at the at the Rhineland model. I think it can absolutely go further than that. But I see the Rhineland model as a really good kind of intermediary step between the kind of the Anglo-Saxon economies that a lot of countries have today, and a more cooperative economy.
So, what would be your main objection to the Rhineland model? In what way doesn't it go far enough? So, for example, the main tenets of the Rhineland model would be, for example, good infrastructure, good public transportation. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily free, but for example, subsidies for senior citizens, students, and whatever. You see this, for example, in the Netherlands, students have free public transportation so they can go wherever and follow colleges and that kind of stuff. Same goes for hospitals, heavily subsidized yet private insurance companies, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I absolutely think that it's like an improvement from a lot of the economies we have today. And I would prefer it any day of the week over the Anglo-Saxon side of things. But I think there are a few like key improvements that you could make to exacerbate some of the good effects from the Rhineland model. And it's a little bit difficult. This conversation is a little bit weird because you could even make the argument perhaps that a cooperative model could, in some ways, depending on how it's structured, maybe it's not fully cooperative, maybe could fall under a Rhineland model, to some regard. But I would say that some of the key things that differentiate, kind of mainstream average Rhineland model, economics from a completely cooperative company. It would be things that, for example, having a society that has a tighter, a more democratic control over where, how the wages are distributed within the company and how the profits are, moved and how they're maintained and who they're delegated to. And while I'm sure that there may be some, Rhineland models that are able to do this in an effective way, which is another reason why I believe that things like the Rhineland model and increasing unionization, for example, is a really good thing. I feel like when cooperatives get to do it, and we see this in certain data that we have right now about cooperatives, we see that the wealth distribution is more balanced across a company that's cooperatively run. And the reason why this is important is because, in my opinion, or not in my opinion, but what it does is that it kind of it balances out and it brings together people's class interests so that they're more similar. So, for example, if you had a cooperative fossil fuel company, or any other polluting company or whatever, and it was cooperative, then the people at the bottom of the company would have similar, at least more similar, like class interests with people at the top. And what this means is that the people at the top can't insulate themselves from effects from like climate change, for example. Like they can't just you have an kind of like an epidemic, maybe the wrong word, but like a large spread of very wealthy people buying private islands and mega yachts and doomsday bunkers. You could argue in preparation for climate change, but by balancing out people's class interest and through balancing out the wages and wealth distribution, you'll be more effectively be able to tackle problems like climate change, because nobody would have like an economic incentive to be like, well, I want to make all the short-term profit now, but it doesn't matter if climate change happens because I'm rich enough to just ignore all of that.
Yeah, so there was a lot to unpack there, So first of all, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of any large corporations who really operate on such a great scale that those wage disparities that you see, for example, in Shell or whatever, are applicable.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest cooperative that I know of is a Dutch company, Friesland Campina, which is a cooperative of farmers and dairy suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure about those wage disparities in like big international global companies. So I'm not sure if cooperatives that are scalable would yield to that data. I'm not sure, because that data isn't available as far as I'm aware. And well, furthermore, well, you talk a lot about wages, but of course the class disparity is between people that own capital.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't tie necessarily into wage.
Yeah, but if you have like a cooperative model where everybody is, part ownership of the company, you therefore own part of the company capital, you have a say in, how the profits from those, that capital, which is collectively owned, not privately owned, that's a key thing. Right now, capital owners are, vastly, differentiated from working class people because they have private ownership over capital, and they have almost, maybe they share it with, let's say, a board or something, but a lot of people have private or like very, sharing control over the profits of capital with a very small group of people. While if it's an entire, company who collectively own the capital, then the resources will be distributed, more equally. So you could say that rather than increasing the amount of people the affluence of people who don't own capital, we are increasing the amount of people who do own capital. And we're trying to get as many people to own capital in the form of, a collective stake in their business as possible.
Yeah, so that's a very, very admirable goal, and I think I'm sort of in agreement with that. But the co-op model, how I understand your position is that we should strive towards co-ops, and that can be done in a Rhineland framework. But I'm not really sure how normative your position is. So do you think all businesses should be cooperatives? And what I'm also curious about, like, if you own a stock in your company, are you allowed to sell that stock? I mean, suppose you don't want to take in the dividends, the profit, because, I don't know, you think it's a better move to just
sell it up front?
sell it and just take on a nice little pocket change and leave the company in a couple of years. And to who are you allowed to sell your stock then?
Yeah.
Because it's
So yeah. Sorry.
private ownership of stocks.
Hmm. I should have said this in the very beginning, because this is very important, I feel, to how this discussion should go. I think we agree on a lot, overwhelmingly when it comes to economics and business structure. We agree. I think that moving towards, for the countries that are still on the Anglo-Saxon side, moving towards, more Rhineland model, more, stakeholder models of business is absolutely an improvement. I'm sure you agree with all this, improving the conditions for union rights, workers' rights in general, things like this. When it comes to how I would institute cooperatives, which is something you asked me about, what should every country be a cooperative? Just like you said before, I wrote this down, that there isn't really a lot of evidence that these wage discrepancies would still hold up, when the company grows and gets bigger. And that's true. There is, rather little research about cooperatives on that large of a scale been done, because it's a relatively new idea, and there are some institutional barriers that cooperatives face that private companies do not, for example. And that's why my ideal plan towards getting to this worker cooperative society would be moving towards a sort of more Rhineland, more stakeholder oriented economy, and then from there doing a bunch of research into cooperatives, maybe giving preferential loans to people who want to start cooperative businesses, and then seeing, we have more, data and more research into how this would, play out on a larger scale and with larger businesses. And that's the way I would be favorable, like kind of implementing worker cooperatives. And then if it still holds up, which I think it will, based on the research we have right now, I don't think all of the benefits from worker cooperatives will just dissipate as soon as it gets larger. I believe that that'll keep going, and the research will prove that it's a sustainable model. But of course, I'm not going to put the cart before the horse, which is why I support a system where we gradually implement worker cooperatives through more of them existing through preferential loans, for example, and through more research about them.
Yeah, so about the research angle, so it's very hard to get hard data, but what is the economic consensus when it comes to analysis is that as corporations grow, corporations co-ops, they become less democratic. And you see this especially in, for example, the tech sector. Like a lot of startups nowadays move from sort of startup phase to growth, and then eventually they become less democratic. So I have personally experienced that in my working life, but you can also see this, for example, in the recent saga surrounding Uber Eats. You can see this in Booking.com. These companies started up very democratic, not as co-ops, but they did have formalized workplace democracy. Like the working people, even the people in customer support, had a say in how to run the departments, even run the business to some extent. And the only way for those companies to attract capital to grow, to invest, is to attract outside capital. So basically, you can't really grow a business when the workers own it, because you need to attract outside money. Now, if you want to go co-op and stimulate that, then you would sort of move to state ownership of businesses, because then the state would have to invest that money, right?
I mean, not necessarily. So I don't necessarily think that we have to either mandate the production. I mean, the fact that companies have to all be cooperatives in the short term. How I would see this working would be more of setting up structures and systems that would help cooperatives get started and be able to and for them to be able to maintain themselves through when they develop more. So things like maybe government loans would be preferential to government ownership, in my opinion. Things like changing something rather basic as changing cultural attitudes, I think we have about business, will go a long way in increasing the amount of cooperatives we have. But I don't necessarily think that all cooperatives go immediately traditional when they get bigger. Of course, as we've said multiple times, there's a lack of resource. But like if I talk about Mondragon, for example, in Spain, it's not a like cooperative, like, you know, it's not pure cooperative, but as it's grown and as it's developed, it's maintained like, you know, the spirit of you know, workplace democracy and of cooperation. Now it's more of a I think federation is the right word for it, of, you know, cooperative businesses, because once they grow, it would be more efficient to organize it in a federacy than just one big cooperative business. But, you know, as I said before, a great load of more research would be super beneficial to this, to see exactly how it pans out. So I don't think the case can be made 100% either for or against worker cooperatives being able to be sustained, you know, in the long term. And I think that the only way to really see if it does is by you know, investing in worker cooperatives and improving their conditions with things like loans and general cultural attitudes shifting.
Yeah, but there's a big financial risk when it comes to loans, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're in agreement about workplace democracy and how that's leads to more worker autonomy and more happiness and that kind of stuff. And I'm even sort of in agreement, especially in the startup phase and the resilience of companies, that it might have a positive impact.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to scaling up and growing, that's where there's a problem. And when you just say like, okay, the state should loan money just based on the way a company is organized, that's untenable, because that as soon as you inject easy money into the economy, you create bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a lot of capital available, bubbles will grow because, well, you don't own any explanation on how your company is performing if it's uncritical loaning. And as soon as it becomes, you know, critical loaning, looking into the books by state bureaucrats and that kind of stuff, well, then you would sort of have to give the state a say in how the business is run, and it becomes, well, less democratic, because then there would be some kind of government bureaucrat sitting in the workers' council, or however you want to call it, and say like, okay, you guys want to go this way, but, you know, in my case, the Dutch government thinks that in order to sustain growth, you have to do something else, and we're the guys loaning you the money, so, you know, we have the leverage.
Mm-hmm. How I would see this working, because I agree with you. I really want to stay away from I'm sure you shared the sentiment as well, from state ownership of companies. I feel like there's a lot of issues that come with that. I think that certain industries should be, you know, state owned, but I think it'll be it's a hard sell to get, you know, most of business and most of firms to become state-owned. So the way I would see this working is, let's say that worker cooperatives don't work in the long term at all, and, you know, they've been given loans to be able to start up. If that's the case, and the only way, you know, a company is able to, you know, keep growing and keep existing is by, you know, growing and then transitioning out of worker cooperatives, then I don't necessarily know if, you know, the fact that you said that it would come with a huge cost would still be true. Because, you know, if they grow and they're like, okay, you know, this doesn't work, we have to shift towards a more traditional model, the loan would still be repaid to the government. So I don't think we would be losing that money, even if, you know, it wouldn't be like, here is this money from the government, you need to stay a cooperative no matter what, you know. Obviously, if the only way to pay back the loans is by, you know, shifting the model, then, you know, that's what has to be done. But even if, you know, even if not, you know, the bigger businesses, if it's not possible for them to be cooperatives, I would still say it's beneficial for a lot of the companies that can, a lot of smaller companies, which we do have data on, however, and that constitutes a pretty large portion of the people that are employed and of the economy as a whole, would, you know, remain or could be cooperatives.
Yeah, so the data is absolutely right. Small businesses thrive on their democracy and even co-op. Like, I wouldn't say that having the employers be shareholders in some kind of legal form would hamper their growth. However, that point about injecting money into co-ops, I'm not sure you entirely understood that point, because if you
I mean, it wouldn't be just paying them, it would be, you know, through loans that would be expected to be paid back.
Yeah, exactly. But if you inject a lot of capital, and for example, nowadays tech is very there's a hype train on tech. So suppose there's easy money.
Mm-hmm.
Every John Doe could say like, oh, okay, I have this amazing idea for a website for a company or whatever, and he would get a loan, and he would start a scope with 10 of his friends.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's loaned uncritically, there would be a lot of loans given out, but if those ideas aren't critically assessed,
Mm-hmm.
well, then loans wouldn't be able to be paid back because the companies, well, wouldn't be so resilient. I mean, co-ops are more resilient, but I don't think they can compensate for really bad business ventures.
Yeah.
You would create a bubble. You would create a lot of capital, a lot of businesses that would pop up and die down again, leading to joblessness,
Mm-hmm.
to debts, to holes in state finance, however you want to structure that. So that leads to financial downturns.
Yeah, so obviously the priority here is not try to get cooperatives in at any cost. The priority is obviously preventing things like that we're talking about. Like you mentioned, a bunch of businesses shutting down, unemployment, so if it, turns out that, you would have to structure these loans in a way that is sustainable, right? You would have to have, rather high standards, I guess, for, so you, like you said, so anyone couldn't be like, well, I guess I'll just do a cooperative because there's, it's really easy to get a loan that way, to avoid predatory loaning and bubbles.
But that's why that doesn't necessarily work, because you can't do it willy-nilly. So you'd have to have expertise, and then either the state needs to attract that expertise,
Mm-hmm.
and have a seat at the table to make sure that the money that's loaned is being invested viably.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would have less workplace democracy. So
Yeah, I mean, but I would say that maybe a short term.
Here, you see?
Yeah, but I would say that in that situation, maybe a short term, period where, the people in charge of giving these loans to companies, who are working of the government, of course, have a bit of a say in, okay, well, you should probably do this with the company in order to stop it from failing. People are experts on this. I would say that short period where you deviate, slightly from this period of, from the ideal of, the cooperative ownership is still a whole lot better than, a traditional firm. And if it is successful, with the help of, certain stakeholders and advisors from the state, if it's successful and they can pay back the loans, well, then, the government has had their part there and they can move out. And then you have, a successful functioning cooperative business.
Yeah, for a while, but then you can't grow fast without attracting new money. And you can't attract new money from investors if, well, your employees are the only ones allowed to hold a stock in the company. So either the employers need to sell stock,
Mm-hmm.
which is a natural thing to do, but then they wouldn't have a say in anymore unless you have a rigid Vineland model. And this was the case. This is the case in the Netherlands, and I was pretty sure it's the case in Sweden and Germany,
Mm-hmm.
where the employers, regardless of whether they're stockholders, have a seat at the table with the board of directors. So that's what you need. And I'm not sure if stock ownership of employers is the mandatory way to go. And if that's not the way to go, it's not the co-op model that you've suggested, then it would be some sort of Vineland model. A more expensive Vineland model than we currently have. And that's what I would argue for.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be the co-op model that you argue for, I think.
Yeah, so what would seem realistic based on, what I know right now, is if we get to a stage where we can have, as big of a portion as economically and financially viable be cooperative. So we don't necessarily need every business to be cooperative, because as you said, that might, that's going to raise issues with the loaning practices and, quickly growing, especially competing with other countries and their, businesses that may not be worker cooperatives. But, for the businesses and for the part of the economy that can be run by cooperatives, in an economically feasible way, should probably be that. And if that constitutes, even if most of the economy still falls under, the Rhineland model, and you could say that, well, an economy that's, 80, 70, 60%, regulated traditional businesses with high union participation and things like that, good workers' rights, and the other 40, 30, 20% be cooperatives. If you want to label that a Rhineland model, then that's completely acceptable for me. And that model still feels a lot better than what we have today, for example.
Oh, we have today in America, right? Because
Yeah,
yeah, but what we should be aware as Europeans that this model that we have on the continental European side is under siege by the Anglo-Saxon
yeah.
model. So this model is somewhat on the back foot, and I think as progressive Europeans, we should educate ourselves more on this model and what we have, and put ourselves on the front foot again. And for the Americans, definitely uh, take lessons from especially the German way of running things, but also to some extent the Swedish and Dutch way of doing things. Uh, I'm curious about your position. Like we talked about, or we said that this is a stakeholder model.
Mm-hmm.
What, in your opinion, are the stakeholders instead of the stockholders? So who is a stakeholder in a company? And let's say, for example, in the public transport company, or better yet, the schools, because we also said we're going to talk about schools some.
Yep.
So, yeah. Who would you identify as stakeholders in the school?
Yeah. So well, from what I've read about the Rhineland model so far and the way it's portrayed, it seems to be a three-way interaction between the customers, the workers, and some of the outside investors. And those three tend to be the main three stakeholders that collaborate in the Rhineland model.
State as well. Well, state
The
as
state.
well. Government
Mm-hmm.
usually does. And while the work is usually mediated by several unions, of course.
Yeah.
And yeah, but for example, in a school, like who would be justified in having a stake in a school in the school?
Sorry, you cut out at the end.
Who would be stakeholders when it comes to schools and how
Well,
the school is structured financed? But because we also said we would talk about private schools and
yeah.
whether they're allowed to exist or not.
So I would argue that a school, which which is very different from most other businesses. I would say that the stakeholders in a school is fairly, as everyone in society to some extent. You have the government that, of course, benefits from having an educated population, and you have the population which benefits from having more educated population that can generate more economic activity, more entrepreneurship, more more ideas. So with education specifically, I would say that education, the stakeholders are everybody, not just kids, parents, and like school. I guess it would be everybody, because everybody really has an interest in ensuring that that the quality of the schools are maintained and are at a good standard. Yeah.
Yeah, but would you say that, for example, the students and the parents have a higher stake in a specific school functioning well?
What do you mean? I mean,
Well,
they're
I
more
mean,
directly interacting with the school, yes, but I would still say that everyone else definitely has a stake in the success of the next generation of people.
yeah, true, of course, but yeah. So when you have a specific school that's functioning poorly, right?
Hmm.
Then I would say that, for example, parents or students, depending on how affluent they are,
Hmm.
should be allowed to sort of split off from that school if they can afford it, for example, because local government or state government or national government simply doesn't deliver the goods,
Yeah.
either in a cultural way or an educational way. Because, of course, we benefit from well educated people, but school does more than just educate people in a technical way. It also socializes people and instills children and teens with cultural values. And well, when it comes to cultural values, I think sort of allowed to shop around and maybe invest in some more heavy-handed cultural education. I would agree. So I'm not entirely in agreement with you about the need for just public schools.
Yeah. So before we like, I've written down what you said, and so I'm gonna get back to it in a bit. Before we move on to the schooling bit, I just want to like put a bow on the business side of things. Just yeah, just showing that we moved on for it. So basically, I think that pragmatically, what's important right now, and we should both be in agreement for with this, is in places that are more in the Anglo-Saxon model, trying to bring about more stakeholder, more Rhineland ideology and ways of looking at business, and moving it forward that way, increasing union rights, union participation, workers' rights in general, and things like that as like the most, I guess, realistic, and workplace democracy and all that as the most like pragmatic way of improving the quality of businesses today. Would you agree with this?
Yeah, I would agree definitely with this, and I think it's so important that young people, both Europeans and Americans, become a member of at least the national union. I know in the Netherlands there's a national union which is basically screaming for younger members, younger input.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm sure the situation is very similar in Sweden because they have roughly the same structure,
Mm-hmm.
registered structure, and it's so important because those unions are the guys that sit around the round table and make sure that our workers' rights are expanded upon, maintained, and guarded. And we have such a big problem with, well, actual baby boomers, not the internet boomers, hogging the conversation and steering it towards, the old system of pensions needs to be maintained over the backs of young people. So, do become a member of a union if you see any chance whatsoever. And I'm not sure how the situation is in the States, but, well, organize in whatever way you can and make sure you at least have get a federation of unions off the
Exactly.
ground, expand on solidarity and all that.
Unionize your workplace, organize, democratize, do all that, the good things. Okay, that's good.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So we put a little bit above bow on that, which is great. Now we ended on mostly agreeing, of course, which I thought we would. Okay, so
we agreed to agree at the start.
exactly, we did. Schooling. So you brought up a few things here. The like the parents or like the family's ability to shop around, cultural things. Like what did you say?
Nothing. I
Okay.
dropped my mic, I think.
All right. Yeah. So a parent's ability to shop around for their own kids, putting like expanding upon cultural inclinations from their parents, and then profit over purpose. Sorry, no, that's something that I wrote down. Oops, never mind. I just leaked my my debate notes. Whoops. No, I'm kidding. So here, there are a few things here which I would find problematic. Number one, I don't want there to be any schools that have when you were talking about the cultural aspects that enforce or that try to indoctrinate things like religion in their schools. And that's something that is vastly more common, at least in my experience, at least here in Sweden, in in private schools and in certain like free schools is what we call them here in Sweden. And I want to keep education as far away from things like religion and things like that as possible, because I feel like religion as a concept should not be taught in school. I think that school should be a place where you learn important critical thinking skills, analytical skills that you require for the rest of your life, and should be kept to the material knowledge that we have right now of the world and how it's structured. And I believe it's like an absolute like net negative for society if we section off people and educate people in things like like religion, even as early as childhood, because these people don't really have a say in the matter. These kids don't have a say in the matter, and this is like religion and those ideas are kind of being pushed upon them. So that's one of the reasons why I'm against the like free private school endeavors, is because a lot of religious and weird cultural values are pushed upon kids. Do you want to talk about that a bit more before we get on the other one, so we can do this like one by one?
Yeah, of course, because I mean, now will be the time to, of course, reveal that I am actually a teacher, and a teacher that actually specializes in teaching critical thinking skills. And I hear this a lot, this sort of magical thinking about, oh, if we just teach children enough critical thinking skills, then it will all end up well. But there's a difference in capacity in critical thinking with a lot of students, and well, you simply can't teach everybody to think critically to a substantial degree. This is just a matter of talent, I think. So you will always have a large segment of the population that needs sort of cultural identity to inform their moral choices. I'm a, at least that's how I feel right now, and that's why I think that things like, well, you called it indoctrination, but I think it's sort of, and I'm a secular guy, but I think we need schools to spread cultural identity, and I think people should have a choice in what flavor that is. So that's how. Um, I was just laughing at Dominic in chat because yeah. So yeah, well, of course, personally, I have good experiences with special education, Catholic education, but yes, that's my opinion. People, you can't teach everybody to think critically, so you need a dogma, a set of principles that you instill kids.
Yeah, I reject this. I think that it's number one, it's very risky to I guess I first of all, I should probably put this up front because it's a premise I have. I don't think there is a significant part of the population that can't be taught effective critical thinking skills, but the core part of it is that we don't, that something that isn't that isn't material, that isn't observed in reality, that can't be proven through the scientific method, is being pushed in schools. So things like religion and things like that. I don't think that religion is a substitute for somebody having issues with critical thinking skills. I completely disagree with this, and I think it is the indoctrination for the following reasons. Number one, the child in very few of the cases, especially when religions push upon them, have like a choice of what school they want to go to, and it becomes such a core integral part of their identity if it's taught to them in school at a very early age. And having a part of your identity be connected to something that is not materially demonstrable, and that flies in the face of the way I would say that it's good to structure beliefs in democratic system, which is a way of structuring beliefs that revolves around critical thinking and research. And having that be encouraged with kids, it seems like a really bad idea for a general democratic nations where people are expected to vote, and it benefits all of us that as much of our population as possible is educating critical thinking skills. Additionally, I don't know if the parents should have the ability to say that, well, my kid shouldn't learn critical thinking skills, they should learn religious dogma instead.
So first off, like, what kind of values would be underpinned by scientific thinking? Because I get how they're underpinned by critical thinking, but
Yes.
not, how would you call that scientific? Like, for example, we talked about the need for people to have autonomy in the workplace because that's, well, morally good.
Hmm.
How would you make that argument in a scientific way? Because I mean, you sort of could basically use people as means to for profit. You could do that. There's no physical or any kind of limit to that that's described by science. That's described by, well, moral principles that we sort of arrive at through our well, cultural background. For most people, not everybody reads count. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would say that a better way of being able to arrive and support your ideas, such as for example supporting workplace democracy, can in large part come from a place of critical thinking and understanding and being in touch with love, of scientific literature, but also I wouldn't say that like being empathetic and being moral is tied to religion in any particular way. Like I wouldn't say that religion is one of the defining factors that allow people to build the morals where they would, for example, find worker cooperatives to be beneficial. I think that there's a multitude of ways by which you can get that to that conclusion without the use of religion. And I would ideally keep away from something that would be good to teach in schools are things like logic, certain levels of philosophy, for example, as ways of I guess not necessarily influencing morals, but giving people the tools to build their own morals and their own values. I think that would be a far better way than religious.
But again, like, still dodge the question, because all that thinking critically about scientific data and all that's instrumental reasoning. I mean, that's reason, that's form of reasoning, but it's not critical thinking. It's not thinking about what justifies values. It's just about how to best describe certain phenomena, how to get from A to B, but formulating where you want to be and why. For example, a community based on solidarity. I don't think you can get there by the scientific method. That requires real critical thinking. And then what I struggle with as a teacher is, well, from 30 kids in the class, I think roughly these are smart kids. Roughly 15 get there in a significant way, and other are more dogmatic in their approach, which is fine. But then they need to have a good dogma, good principle, and maybe not try to lift up that mess and just assume it from people who are more talented in that way. I mean,
yeah, so I would say that, of course, it's very difficult to build an educational system that revolves entirely around, just like critical thinking skills. Of course, there will be, social and cultural pressures, and, values are perpetuated through these systems that are pushed upon the kids. But I would say that, that religion is not, it's not the only way, of course, to build these values. And it's not, the best way either. It's not the way that, because there are a bunch of negatives that come with, religious as well. But I agree that, certain religious teachings, they promote, good, I guess, axiomatic values that you can agree with. But I think there are other, other ways to teach these values, other ways to express these values through other, cultural and social forces, rather than having them be, pushed upon kids through like a dogmatic perspective on religion, for example.
Yeah, so, well, I think we're too much stuck in the weeds with religious schools, something that I'm not particularly fond of. But I think some cultural identity is warranted. That's one leg of the argument. But the other leg is simply that the function of the school, and that I'm going to give you the insider perspective. It isn't just educating kids for qualifying them to get into higher education or whatever. It's also explicitly about socializing kids. It's also explicitly about just putting 30 kids in a room and correcting them when bad things happen so they become functioning adults eventually. And that's always done in a cultural framework. And I think it's in a diverse multicultural society, it's completely justified to put a Hindu, Muslim, Catholic, or whatever flavor on those interactions. And to have, special holidays and special days off and all that stuff. I mean, I'm not talking here like deep-seated religious dogma, just the flavor of the social interactions that we have. I think that should at least be justified, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it shouldn't be the job of education to do. I think that there are plenty of other places in social settings where this should be taught. I don't think it should be the role of the classroom. I don't think there should be, somebody, except for, parents. It's impossible to, regulate what parents teach their kids, and I don't want to do that either, because that's a dangerous slope to go down. But I believe that the fundamental purpose of schooling is to give children tools to learn, tools to form their own values, tools to critically analyze things, tools to, research, tools to interpret reality. And then through other social settings, like their family at home, the kids, the other kids that are there, values of, specific teachers, not necessarily, of the curriculum, values of friends or whatever. I think that those places are ways that, these values could be learned in an effective way. And I think that making it the job of the schools to, or most important, making like the role, or giving the parent the ability to hand pick which values, your child will probably adopt, because, the type of values that are pushed upon you as a kid are instrumental to the development of you in the future, is a net negative. And I want to, this goes in hand in hand with my idea of separation of like church and state, for example. I believe that education and education, I mean, religion and education should stay, separate, at least as far as it goes to, religious indoctrination, religious teaching. I mean, in Sweden, we have a class where we talk about different religions in like an abstract way, or like a kind of like a bystanders way. We learn about all the different religions, who are the figures, what are their key values or whatever. That type of religious education is fine, but I don't want religious education where one certain set of values or some ideas are elevated above others.
You think it's justified that you, for example, you probably have like a holiday around Christmas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how is that justified when all the Muslim kids in your class, assuming that there are some, don't have a week holiday when it's Ramadan?
I don't know how much this has to do about schools.
Well, I mean, I guess you could differentiate when you'd have an option to have a religious infused school, because there's public schools in Europe and in America as well are very much infused around the Christian calendar. So, I mean, that alone would sort of, I think, justify to some extent differentiating between different cultural identities, simply so you can visit family during the holidays that matter within your subculture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with making society, more inclusive of different cultures, and less like I guess, how do I say this, Christian centric? I don't know what the right word is. Sorry.
Right, but I actually wanted to talk more about private schools. Actually, private schools where rich kids go, because I mean, I don't see why it's any of our business what people do with their surplus income. So, I am a socialist, so I do think that every billionaire is a policy failure. Maybe even every 100 plus millionaire is a policy failure.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, I mean, if you have surplus income, if you have a pile of money lying around, why shouldn't you be able to just invest that in a private school with some of your posh friends and have smaller classrooms for your specific kids? I mean, not exactly fair, but
yeah,
the feels better results, smaller classrooms, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the reason why I don't like private schools in general, I have a few reasons for it. Number one, it tends to lead to things like in some ways, I think even the word like that's something that we can say in Sweden, absolutely, like things like class and sometimes even racial or cultural segregation in the way schools are handled and in the way education environments are formed. There's been studies that prove this, that prove that a more mixed classroom with people from all different types of socioeconomic classes, from all types of cultures, from all types of background, creates a better and more effective learning environment for everybody. So that's one of the reasons why I think that the private schools and selecting that I want to go to school with all posh people.
I'd like to react to that because, yeah, of course, that's a result of institutional racism, and well, that's not justified, of course. But if institutional racism is eventually solved, I think that's going to be on about the 23rd century at this rate. But whatever, if that ever is solved, I mean, then we'd still have cultural, ethnically diverse private classrooms. And well, I mean that basically your objection here harkens back to institutional racism, which is of course wrong. But I'm not sure if it justifies killing off the institute of a private school.
So let's say that even if we could get rid of all types of all types of like institutional racism and all types of if we could get rid of like all that and we had a system where those factors didn't exist anymore, we would still see a situation where you would still have like different classroom environments and segregation based on class, for example. And on top of this, you would also see a system that, from the very get-go, from your education, predisposes you to having better outcomes and, better opportunities in life purely because of where you were born and who you were born to and, the conditions that they had. Something that's very important to me, just generally as like an axiomatic value, is that I'm a very strong believer in the concept of meritocracy and having and giving everybody as equal of an opportunity as we can give them, and then having their effort decide where they how successful they are based on that. And I feel like private schools and schools that give advantages to people just by the basis of being born into an affluent family, flies in the face of that idea and that value.
Yeah, I agree with the value, but well, realistically speaking, good teachers and and classrooms are in short supply. And of course, it would be ideal if we have those along strictly meritocratic lines.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see how you can structure that. Like, how would you have a strictly meritocratic system in which there are a few excellent schools with small classrooms? Because, of course, you said diverse classrooms lead to better outcomes. Well, that's somewhat true, I think, from my experience in education,
Mm-hmm.
but very small classrooms, and I'm talking like 5, 6 students in a room.
Mm-hmm.
Those yield the best results. Now, I teach both groups of 31 diverse kids, and I teach groups of 5 or 6 rich kids.
Mm-hmm.
With the 5 or 6 rich kids, you get so much farther with them because it's a small group, it's way more manageable. But that skill of education is completely unpayable by public institutions alone. It's
Yeah.
just doable. So to have that excellent kind of education, well, I mean, you'd need some outside capital from rich parents. How else would you finance it?
Yeah, so if this is like a really desirable thing, having small classrooms, for example, you asked the question before of like how would like my ideal school system look like, and we had something rather similar to this in Sweden actually. Not now because now we privatized a bunch of our schools, and since we did that, we have seen a rising, school inequality and a dropping overall in the grades that we had before. But how it used to work is that all the schools were public, and they were publicly owned, and they were funded by, by tax money. And the reason why it worked so well is that the first of all, we didn't have like, I guess, like free school choice. So how it worked is that we have like a system. I don't know how it works in the Netherlands, but we have like communes, which are like small like local areas in a country. They would delegate, okay, people that, live in this area, they go to this school, people live in this and they go to this school. Maybe we'll switch a few people out, however they want to work it like that. And then you were basically almost like, I guess, assigned to a school, in your district. And this, led to a wide, a mix where you would have, the children of like executives at factories going to the same schools as, kids of shoe cleaners. And that also led to, since it's all financed by the government in a large extent, it was kind of like a decentralized, like bottom up, like way of delegating the school. Is that if a school had trouble, if they lacked resources, if they need more money, if they needed, whatever would be necessary, they would, request that up to the government. And because the government has an incentive, this is one of the main things that I like more about public schools and private schools, is because fundamentally, no actor has a better incentive than a government to improve the quality of the education for the citizens. And they would ensure that, hey, this community is struggling, so it's in our best interest and in everybody's best interest to invest into everything we can to resolve those issues. So you had kind of like an overview where you could structure the budget and reassign money and resources according to need rather than according to where it was most profitable. So what you said is that if we really wanted the thing with the small classes, like you said, with 5 or 6 students, perhaps systems of, I guess, like for students that are like really like excelling, I guess, in school, and that have really high potential to do really well, and who give the effort under such of a system, would maybe be given access to things like private smaller classes, if the resources are there, of course, for those people that are, exceptionally performing exceptionally well during schooling.
Yeah, but that sort of again dodges the question. Like, people just have surplus income. There's money lying around. So I think the problem here is that you're simply assigned a school based on the choices of bureaucrats. And well, that's not the way it works in the Netherlands, I think, at all.
Mm-hmm.
But
this isn't how it works in Sweden, by the way. This is how it used to work in Sweden.
Right. Because, well, the way the Dutch do it is, you have free school choice.
Yeah.
Every school is required to do a certain curriculum, and you're free to pop something on top of that curriculum. For example, a little bit of Catholicism, a little bit of Hinduism, whatever you want. And you can also sort of roll out different kinds of didactics, free school, democratic schools, Montessori, you name it, all kinds of junk.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Not to be derivative, but all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff. So yeah, that gives parents all kinds of ways to choose a school freely, so you're not assigned one.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, so you can choose a school for free. Well, on top of that, some people have more money, so why wouldn't they be allowed to sort of give the school a big pile of cash and say, hey, those 4 or 5 kids of mine and my 2 friends, why not put them in a smaller group? I mean, it's their money.
Yeah,
Why
I mean,
shouldn't they be allowed to do that? Do they have to sacrifice themselves to? Because research says that on average, all kids perform better in bigger groups. I mean, yeah, so what? It's on average. Everybody thinks their kid is special, and why wouldn't they be allowed to just throw some money at a school?
yeah, I mean, there are several situations in which we restrict people's ability to, or like where they want to spend their, their surplus income. So I mean, see if I can think of an example right off the bat, but for certain, social situations, we value things like, having things be justified and having things be fair and having things be equal more than we justify, like people's ability to spend their income on whatever they want. So, for example, let's say that, there is a new, let's say there was like let's see if I can think of a good example for this. Let's say there's like a line, there's like a queue of some sort for some sort of like government, like tax funded program or project or whatever. And and how it works is that this is a system that's supposed to help, children that are like, I can't think of this, like a good, like children that are struggling in school or whatever. And it's like, it's a selection of 200 kids and they take them in 10 groups at a time or whatever. And they go in that way. And it's ranked in order of need. So, the people that need it the most. Should a person then on like position like 70, who happens to be more rich than the average other person on that list, be able to pay and be like, hey, I wanted to send my kid, to the very front of this line for this program, just because I have the money to do so? Well, we would say, no, probably not, because you don't need it as much as the people, there at the very front. We're not going to let you use your surplus income that you worked for, that it's, completely justified, that is yours, to do something just because we value things like, fairness and outcome over your ability to spend your income on whatever you want.
This is a program. I'm not sure if I caught it all right, but it's about state support, financial support, right, or educational support.
I am sure there are much better examples, but yeah, I hope you get like the general like abstract idea.
Yeah, but, this is maybe I'm betraying a bit more liberal influences here, but I mean, as a teacher, you have sort of the freedom to associate with any kind of contract that you want, and of course, as a consumer, you can ask any service you want. So why wouldn't you be allowed to just interview a few teachers, select the best one, because not every teacher is a great teacher, and then just take the best teacher, rent a nice, isolated room, and say, okay, in this school, the classroom size is like 15, and I'm paying for everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need any state support. So, I mean, you're not spending public goods then, you're just hiring somebody, offering them a bigger sum of money than the state pays.
Mm-hmm.
It could happen in the Netherlands. I mean, we're well paid, but it could be higher. Could be. And yeah, well, I mean, why wouldn't you be allowed to do that? And,
yeah, so then, for example, I like that example, because in that situation, that, depending on the hours of that teacher, of course, that really good teacher is prevented from teaching, like more students, because, the benefits, I guess, from that one teacher educating, 1, 2, or 3, really gifted students. I don't think that compares to the benefit of that teacher being able to teach, a wide range of students, maybe students that aren't necessarily the best, but students that need it the most. So maybe that, teacher can be incentivized through, for example, subsidies, or a higher wage, to go and work for a school in a poorer district where people have more trouble learning. Then that teacher's abilities would, you'd get more value out of them, because the kids that would need, better, I guess, systems and better resources in order to be able to learn as well or better than other kids are being able to be given them, because, the best of the best aren't always being taken up by the private schools and, their money, because as you said before, chances are that, you know, it's difficult for a government to directly compete with like private capital owners.
Yeah, but I think that's sort of very offensive to teachers because then you're not only is your labor sort of commodified,
Mm-hmm.
it's commodified as a public good. So you're not it's not only do you sell that to one person, you sell it to everybody at the same time. You're not allowed to choose who you sell your labor to. It's just your sort of your labor is suddenly public property
I
because
mean, you're not like assigned to a school. It's like, you know, there's a higher wage in the school in the poorer school district because you do more good there, and you're probably, you know, putting in a lot more effort there teaching those kids and teaching some of the most, you know, like gifted schools in the country. So the government thinks that, hey, you know, it's probably a good idea if we can provide the school with a higher wage, and then they can compete because I assume that if you would raise the wages for a certain teaching position, you know, in public education, there would be a lot of people that wouldn't apply for that position, and this is where you can get some of this, you know, I guess competition if you really want it, where teachers can compete, you know, for each other for who gets to have this position that is higher paid but is also more demanding.
it's very hard because yeah, of course the state can offer higher wages based on I don't know, but well, you actually can do that in the Rhineland model in the Netherlands because the wages of teachers are negotiated collectively, which is part of the Rhineland model actually. But I just don't understand. Like, as long as people have money, they can basically theoretically uh, overbid the government, like whatever they're offering. If they even if they offer 100,000 a year, they can still conceptually overbid the government. Say he's
Mm-hmm.
105,000 a year.
Yeah.
They can always do that as long as they can spend their money freely. So you'd have to justify why can't I freely associate with whoever I want, and why can't they spend their money free however they want? Like, what justifies that?
I would say that the justification for that is better outcomes and a more efficient and, in my opinion, just allocation of resources towards one that benefits society as a whole more than, you know, say like a small, you know, fraction of people who would most likely already be existing in, you know, the upper end of the society when it comes to socioeconomics.
Yeah,
That would be my reason.
Yeah, but then a teacher is a commodity, a piece of capital that's just collectivized, even though we're a person. So that kind of runs.
I mean, a lot of workers right now, I mean, that's how, you know, like that's the way we kind of think about a lot of workers and yeah, wage owners right now in society.
True, but that really cuts at the core of what Marxist calls alienation of the worker. You're just a sort of tool in the machine. But then, on the one hand, you want co-ops so that people can be freer, more autonomous, and then you say, okay, but those people who work in public services like education, and probably policemen would run roughly
Mm-hmm.
the same way, a fireman and all that kind of stuff. Well, those people, because their service is a public service, those people are sort of collective capital for society because well they provide an essential service, so they sort of lose their part of their well I'm not trying to sound melodramatic, but part of their humanity, part of their ability to freely associate and provide services to whoever they want.
Yeah, but I would say that in some cases this is, you know, perfectly justified in some, you know, essential services. Like, for example, you mentioned like firefighters. I wouldn't think it's, you know, I wouldn't like it very much if you know, there was a limited supply of firefighters and the firefighters just went to, you know, the highest bidder, I guess, and, you know, had like private firefighting servants. I mean, sure, you could say that, hey, well, these people are now, you know, autonomous. They can do whatever they want. They can follow the highest bidder. And, you know, you make, you know, what they want of their own labor. But I think that the outcomes for society in that is you know, it's not worth, you know, that benefit. And I think that there are certain industries where we label that, hey, you know, for the common good, things like firefighters probably shouldn't be privatized because that would be, you know, that wouldn't be a very fair, a very, and you could even argue a very effective and on the whole, a very, yeah, good way of structuring the firefighting industry, for example. And I just want to move that type of idea and that type of ideology onto education as well, because I think the education is, you know, I think that it's way more important that what a lot of people like look at as it's absolutely an essential service because it builds like the building blocks and the baseline of an effective and a prosperous civilization.
certainly a less offensive way of, of putting it. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I would say, I mean, as long as I can sort of hop schools to a more often school, it does give people like teachers, like police officers and firefighters and whatever, a
Hmm.
way better negotiating positions towards, well, the government, who also have an incentive to
Hmm.
cut costs, to negotiate higher wages, because
Yeah, so
it's not
teachers unions, for example, I would be in support of that, like any other, industry.
exactly, and our negotiation position would vastly improve if the government, of course, they have a moral incentive and a practical incentive to make sure there are enough schools to go around of sufficient, if not excellent, quality.
Hmm.
We still have like a better negotiation position if we hypothetically could hop schools to a richer school, and that alone would, well, I mean, that would at least give it a practical reason to at least allow private schools and make sure that public schools stay competitive with private schools, which I agree with that. As long as there's enough finance to go around for public schools to stay very competitive with private schools, it would be justified for them to exist.
Wait, what was your question there again? Can you repeat the question?
Would you agree that as long as there's sufficient competition between public and private schools,
Hmm.
that would justify the existence of private schools? I mean, that
Yeah.
would give us a
Um,
good negotiation position.
I don't know if there could be a level of competition, necessarily. I don't know if competition is what we really want when it comes to schooling, because the issue there is that I, for example, believe that a school, this is another issue that with private schools that we didn't even have time to get into, but like a school shouldn't be able to like fail. A school shouldn't be able to go bankrupt. A school should not be an industry where people can be laid off. There can be massive issues of financing, because it's like a for-profit industry at the end of the day. Those things should never happen to schools, because it's an essential service that builds the foundation of our society. It's not like an industry of like making, I don't know, like cars or microphones or whatever. So I think that that's a very clear distinction between the way competition functions in other industries and competition should function in education. However, I would say that there is still absolutely some level of competition that exists even in a fully public society, because in that situation you would have the citizens and the education systems of your program competing against other schools, and other countries and their education systems, to ensure that, number one, your country stays relevant and prosperous and effective on the global economic market, to ensure that people are attracted, high income people that that have the the means to move around to be in whatever country they want, are attracted to your to your nation, and therefore bring with them all the financial incentives that come with that, as well as greater population, and especially people that are pretty affluent would be attracted to their to your country as well. So I would say that competition within a country, I don't know if that's a good idea for the reasons I laid out before, but I would still argue that there may be some level of competition even in a completely public system.
Yeah, because, well, one essential difference between education and, for example, Medicare and firefighters, policemen, and that kind of stuff is that they're very, very different kind of approaches to education. So it's not like a one size fits all instrumental thing, like we need to put out this fire whatever way possible.
Mm-hmm.
There are different kinds of education, for example, more creative, more sport orientated education, more geared towards uh, exploring instead of top down, that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different ways of teaching kids, and so many different, well, cultural, but also just basically what kind of fields of parenting that are important. It sort of justifies the creation of competing schools with competing paradigms. It's not a simple technological question like we need higher educated citizens, because there are a lot of ways to unpack the term higher educated, more critical thinking. There are all kinds of ways of thinking critically.
Yeah. So, for example, I would say that, I would. It is no way for any of us to really prove this, but I would say that public schools would absolutely have an incentive to make a more, a more dynamic population in terms of different educational programs that they can, pick and choose from and develop skills and go through an educational curriculum that is applicable to them. And that would be in the interest of, the state at the end of the day. But I would also say that perhaps this is a better argument, is that I think that governments have more of an incentive to partake in more, maybe more experimental, more expensive, first of all, sort of like educational programs that may have a really positive like long-term benefit once people have graduated from the school and can use these skills that they've learned in the nation itself. While private schools, they may not be willing to take such like a strong upfront cost and experiment and take those risks as a government would.
Well, in practice in the Netherlands, yeah, in the Netherlands we do have a very, very rich stimulation program for different educators to roll out different programs. So yeah, we do have a lot of things to try out, but you don't really see private schools not experimenting. In fact, you see a lot of private schools actually being just as willing to experiment, if not more. Um, but yeah,
I mean, I would say that this could happen, it could go either way. This could absolutely happen in public schools as well. And I'd say that certain types of experimental, like teaching methods would be even more like common and incentivized in public schools and in private schools. But I don't know if if there's a way to win or lose this argument. I would say, it would be reasonable to say that this is like a net wash.
yeah, maybe, but you need to also be aware that in public schools how they are financed when it comes to amount of students and that kind of stuff. There are downward pressures on the quality of education. So schools have a perverse incentive to really fill up those classrooms with as much students as possible, to really attract more students than they're capable of facilitating. And these are all kinds of things that certain parents and kids are victimized by, because the education just isn't as necessarily as good as they would be able to get in a private school.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever way you finance that, unless you're really, really generous as a state with your financing, overly generous.
I don't know if I would call that. I would say that there is like education and maybe healthcare. I don't know if you want to get into like private or public healthcare or what the opinions are on that, but things like this, they should absolutely be like the priorities of like a government's budget, because really like the education system, it's, in my opinion, it's like the most important aspect of society. Is what really forms everything else and ensures that a good education system, a really good education system especially, would really lead to good outcomes and a good bedrock for society to build off of. So I don't know if it's if it could ever be like overly generous, I guess, for education. And even if that were the case and you would run like a short-term loss, I guess, on the government budget side for like a really heavy investment in education, I would say that if it's done effectively, of course, which, this all depends on the competency of the government and their ability to research and adapt dynamically to like the changes in data that they're seeing, that this would absolutely, fix itself and actually give like a long-term, a vast long-term positive to the government and to the tax budget in the end.
Problem here is, but this is a very complicated question, is that it's very hard to quantify the benefits of education in a financial sense, and then it's very hard to sort of argue like, okay, our 70 billion euro investment in education yielded 100 billion in net benefit or something like that. So that's way too hard to quantify.
Mm-hmm.
For that reason, well, there's always going to be this discourse about, are we spending too much on education? Because you can't quantify it, you can also always argue from some positions that more money needs to go to defense, more blue on the street, more firefighters, and that kind of stuff. So you always need some kind of story of what benefits there are to education and how to quantify that.
Yeah, I agree. Like quantifying is an issue, but just because we don't, it's I think you're coming at this from like a kind of like a rhetorical and like perspective, right? On how do you maintain this this type of like funding, just like when it comes to popular support, right?
And especially when you look at those hard schools in the hard neighborhoods, I mean, these kids can get really tough, and then some people would make the moral arguments. Okay, the kids, for example, attack the teachers. To name an extreme example.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, they don't deserve any more education as soon as they hit 15, something like that, because the kids are from problematic neighborhoods. You hear these kind of conversations. This puts downward pressure on the willingness to invest in those hard schools in the hard areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so, the way you would solve this is with like effective discourse and trying to explain more, like basically more sociology, I guess, like explain to more people that hey, an investment now in schooling and education in these poor neighborhoods is going to save us a lot of money in the future in terms of not having to pay, because like quality of education and funding of education is a really a strong predictor of criminal activity in the future. So by ensuring that these people have like strong educational opportunities now, we're going to save a bunch of money on police and things like that, and prison, and criminal justice system money in the future, because you won't have as many people committing crimes due to them having the opportunity to partake in this type of education. But I see where you're coming from. I can absolutely see how it can be, especially in today's political climate, to make those like arguments. And this is something that that is reflected perfectly in climate change. How any politician that really tries to tackle climate change, it's very hard for them to remain popular, because it requires some short-term like sacrifice. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, just like climate change, I would say, yeah, it's an uphill battle, but it has to be fought.
Exactly. Well, bear in mind that those are the most densely populated areas that are hardest to teach. So yeah, this is going to require fast investment, and I'm hesitant to say like, yeah, go ahead, be an idealist and just go put in those idealist arguments. But when it comes to quantifying, that's also very difficult. So I'm sort of almost a doomer in this sense that I do think that public education is the best shot for some kids to get excellent education, even though it costs some kids, well, even though it puts a bit of a downward pressure on public education. Mm-hmm. I think it's the best chance we have of educating some people in an excellent way. The best of the best. And I think that's also worth something. I'm not saying it should be the norm. I'm not saying it should be too much pressure on the public education system, but some public schooling could create excellent education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like we've run through about the arguments that we have. I would disagree. Obviously, I would say that the potential of giving certain children that are already going to have, or of giving certain kids that are already going to have really good predispositions in life, because then they would be able they would be the type of people that could afford private education, and giving these people like an additional additional advantage isn't worth both, I guess, morally and I would say like materially the consequences of like putting the downward pressure on the public school education. But I don't know how much more content there is for us to cover here. I don't know if do you have anything?
Sorry, you've cut out after you said, do you have anything?
Yeah, is there anything new, do you think, that about the education bit that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think I'm a bit more to the middle than you are to the left, but yeah. That's all right.
I mean, I think just like the last thing, fundamentally we can both agree that education is really important, and ensuring that everybody has access to like, regardless of where they're born, have access to some level of quality education is essential.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Okay. So you want to get into gender for a bit, or
Okay, we can do the last. Yeah, we have time. We have time. We'll do the gender meme.
this is more of an exploratory dialogue. So,
Mm-hmm.
based on your YouTube film, My Position. So you basically said gender serves no function. I'm not sure what you're. I was wondering if you can expand a bit more on that, because
Yeah, that may have been a bit reductionist. What I mean when I said that gender doesn't serve any function, I mean that gender doesn't serve any exclusive function that can't be filled by other social mechanisms, except for gender, and that gender also comes with a whole load of negatives, that would be intrinsic if we decide to get these positive outcomes from gender exclusively. Does that make sense?
yeah, a bit, but I sort of disagree with that, because I think, for example, gender. I think the function of gender would be something like signaling your preferences.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For example, if you're a lesbian woman, you can sort of signal by certain fashion or whatever what kind of people you're interested in approaching you in a playful manner, right?
Yep.
So, and I think that's a function, and that's gender, right? I mean, same goes for being non-binary or male or female. You just signaling in a cultural way, and I think that's very valuable. And I think what I also noticed with some of my students is to put this really onus on. It's just an individual thing. It's just an individual preference. And I think, well, not entirely. You need sort of to be recognized as non-binary, female or male, because or else you're just not male or female. And I think people should try to recognize and be well, progressive in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But you still need recognition from your society, from your broader society. It's not. You're not a gender in isolation. You're male, female relative to the other genders, right?
Yeah, so there are a few points in this. So we brought up benefit. So you said signaling preferences, and to have this discussion, if we're talking about okay, first of all, I should preface this by saying that right now my priority isn't to like delete gender. The priority is to like reduce like dramatically the role of gender, and like the expectations, most importantly, we place on people, and like the way we assign gender to people. But for the purpose, sorry,
can I interject there, because it's a bit unclear to me, like how do you differentiate between toxic masculinity, for example,
mm-hmm.
and masculinity in general? So masculine is the term for the gender part, right? So
yeah,
those negative expectations, well, that's toxic masculinity, and we can fight that in all kinds of cultural ways.
Mm-hmm.
Making music, making audios, having these kinds of talks with people who are less progressive, and then, well, you can combat toxic masculinity, but masculinity, the positive aspects,
mm-hmm.
demonstrating, I'm strong, for example,
yep.
or I'm cisgender and I like girls. That has a function. I mean,
yeah. So I would say when it comes to things like the masculinity, of course, you correctly identified toxic masculinity and the negative traits that should be, try to be counteracted through cultural and social like cues and inclinations. But the positive aspects of masculinity. So the issue I see with attaching traits to genders is there's two issues with that. Number one, some people are just not going to fit into the dichotomies or the different categories there, and it's gonna have negative effects on them. They're gonna feel left out. They're gonna be expected to do things. They're gonna be expected to behave in certain ways, and them personally, they don't want to do that. So that's the one issue. But the second issue is some of the things that are positive with masculinity, like let's say we associate things like being well-spoken, being confident, being extroverted to some extent with masculinity. So I would say that these positive traits that we associate with masculinity, they shouldn't be encouraged because they are masculine traits. They should be encouraged because they are, objectively positive traits to have. You shouldn't be like, well, I'm confident, I'm well spoken because I'm a man. You know, it should be, well, I'm confident and well spoken because I feel like it benefits me in this and this way. And you know, if we divorce it from, you know, the gendered part, we can like encourage it and apply it to, you know, a wider range of people than if we associate the characteristic in itself to a gender role or like a mode of identification.
Yeah, this is really complicated. So, for example, well, because we associate confidence with masculinity, for example, and because we have, well, at least in the Netherlands, at least in my classrooms, there are some non-binary kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you ever be able to, in this context that we are in now, to move being confident towards the female gender without them becoming sort of non-binary, which, you know, is a thing, so that's fine. And then, I mean, to me, for example, non-binary woman, well, not woman, but non-binary feminine person, then it sort of moves over to being confident, which makes her non-binary instead of feminine.
Mm-hmm.
For example, it really becomes, well, yeah, hard, but not in a bad way. And then,
yeah. So if for example, if being what was the example? Yeah. So this is one of the issues with you know, gender roles and gender as a concept. You said it like, okay, so how do we encourage, you know, people that are otherwise feminine to be confident? Well, you know, it does, like you said, well, okay, well, if we do that, then you might, you know, stride against other things, and then they might feel more comfortable identifying as non-binary. So by detaching like character traits and personality traits from gender would be a really good starting point. So for example, maybe focusing more on the like the maybe the oh, I don't know if I should say it. Okay, let's see, how do I phrase this in the best way? Yeah, so by detaching character traits from gender entirely and being like but like this is an abstract conversation, of course, because it's not like, you know, an economic policy or like whatever where you can just be like, okay, we need to pass this and this policy. This is more like a cultural shift in general, where we need more people to like understand you know, gender theory, and you know, more complicated that gender is like a social construct. It's arbitrary, it's based on time and space. It's not beneficial for us to hold people to personality trait and characteristics based on standards that are completely arbitrary.
I agree. So, but when we pursue this kind of culture, it doesn't, well, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think then gender is sort of devolving into merely fashion, right? I mean,
devolving into what?
If we're not, sorry?
Devolving into what? I didn't hear what you said.
Fashion, like just fashion. If you just strip it from all kind of personality traits, it's left as, I guess, some kind of fashion.
A way of presenting, yeah. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that too thin? I mean, can you really say that I'm a man because I wear pants?
I mean,
and a tank top?
The thing about the word like man and masculinity and you know, gender in general is that it changes dramatically based on time and space. So there is no such thing. There is no like defining characteristic of a man, because man, you know, is a social construct, is something that changes over time. So did you say anything, or was it my mic like switching?
Yeah, I was making.
Okay, so it's something that changes over time. It's something that's not set in stone, and it seems, you know, right now, if we were to talk about this in the material way, you know, letting people, you know, whatever, like identify as whatever they want, associate themselves with whatever characteristics they find is more reflective of their personality, and label that personality as whatever they want, and respecting their identity, you know, has positive, you know, outcomes on that. People, you know, they have a reduced suicide, you know, rate of suicide. They have improved mental health. There are all of these positive consequences to being less strict with, okay, a man is this, this, and this, and being more, like you said, being more thin, being more flimsy about it, being like, okay, you're a man, that's cool. I'll use whatever pronouns you want. You know, I'll respect your identity. So that's one of the things, the material consequences of just having gender kind of be flimsy and being, you know, up to interpretation and being an identity, which it is.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, you're sort of convincing me on this point, and then I feel like I'm becoming more of a gender abolitionist in that sense, because if there's no personality traits, and then what are you supposed to do to signal your sexuality to some extent?
Yeah.
You have to
So
have these,
sorry.
you
I'm
know,
sorry for interrupting.
for example, these cultural rules. So they're not laws; they're cultural rules. So whatever, take that as you want.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when you wear an earring in your left ear, you like guys, and if you wear one in your right ear, you like girls, and if you wear both, like how would you sort of signal your sexual identity? Because that's basically what gender is for, in the most neutral, positive way. You signal some kind of sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So number one, I'm sure we would, even if we're in a completely gender abolition society, I'm sure we would figure out different ways to signal sexuality. Number two, this is probably more important, by reducing the role of gender, and one of those gender expectations is, hey, if you're a man, if you're masculine, you know, you I don't know if I would say you're supposed to, but you're generally in culture and in society, we expect you to be attracted to feminine. This is heteronormativity or whatever. And by having a culture that places less emphasis on your gender identity, your sexuality, and therefore also reduces heteronormativity, for example, we're going to see a dramatic change in the way we see sexuality as a whole. And if we have if I say that, for example, just because I say I'm attracted to like women, for example, that doesn't mean I'm attracted to all women. It means I'm attracted to a certain type, if I have a type, like a certain presentation, a certain presentation that a person has. And the word labeling your attraction as I'm attracted to women, it's fairly broad, because it's like it's too broad, I would say, because it sort of entails that, well, that means that there isn't any like men that you would find attractive, and it means that kind of, well, shouldn't you be attracted to all women then? Well, no, it's like a preference I have, I guess, but that doesn't necessarily need to be tied to gender. So I'm sure there could be some like masculine presentations that somebody can find attractive, but what are you then? Are you bisexual? Are you pansexual? It all becomes, this would like shift so dramatically if we like reduce gender roles in general. Sexuality would see a lot of effects from this, and on top of this, things like signaling sexual preference. You can just say afterwards, well, I'm attracted to these traits, these characteristics, this maybe in a not completely gender abolished, but where they have like less roles, like I'm attracted to more feminine people, more masculine people, things like that.
Yeah, so I think we sort of are in agreement, because I mean, I think fashion and presentation is how you sort of communicate what you are. You present yourself as a sort of mate, because that's why you sort of dress up nice and want to feel confident in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of want to communicate like, okay, you're talking to me, I'm making eye contact in a certain way, and because I present this way and because you present this way, you can sort of, the game is on, so to speak. We can sort of, that's what gender is meant to do. And in a non-toxic community, that would sort of entail no violence, no toxicity, or at least very, very little.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's sort of. But I'm still thinking, then then you're moving sort of away from gender abolitionism, because I just don't see how you present male. Yeah, you just can't present yourself in a sort of exclusive way in that sense. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like personal preference for like sexual orientation is going to weigh more heavily into whether or not somebody finds you attractive than their sexuality as a whole. Unless that's like my experience, and that's the way I would think it works. So it seems like it's the way we like kind of like signal sexuality right now is it's like very broad, and there's like I talked about before, there's like a whole range of ways in which our ways that we look upon sexuality will be completely changed in a more like less gender restrictive society.
So maybe also a nice question for Chad, or maybe to you, like, can you imagine like a society, because gender is fluid and it moves around,
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine like a gender abolitionist society, for example, being gay or being pansexual or whatever would be a gender identity instead of, is that how it works?
I what would be really cool is if we when you would have like less heteronormativity, less, you know, strict gender roles, maybe, you know, none at all, no gender roles, no genders, and everyone maybe would be some form of like pansexual, or hey, I have my types, and I don't know if they identify as a man, I don't know if they identify as a woman, I don't know what they identify as, but this certain presentation, you know, I'm attracted to it. And that would, you know, fundamentally shift the way it would, first of all, it would give people more freedom to express themselves however they want, and that would, you know, bring upon a whole new range of like appearances that people are attracted to, and yeah, that they find appealing and that they want to present as well.
That has its limits. For example, if your type is, for example, a colored person, a black person, you can't walk around in a bar with a T-shirt "blacks only," right? I mean, that would be kind of silly.
Yeah.
So yeah, so yeah, I guess it has its limits, but it's a lot to think about. And I'm sort of moving over, like, okay, I guess if you want to be progressive about gender, you're automatically moving towards gender abolitionism.
Mm-hmm.
And well, yeah.
I mean, it's like gender abolitionism is like a really like long-term goal. Like right now, the key things is stop associating characteristics with gender, start associating characteristics with whether or not they're positive or negative, and making prescriptions based on that. And number two, don't assume people's gender, don't push gender roles, don't push behaviors upon people just based on how they were born, or things like that. And like raise all children the same is a pretty big meme as well.
Yeah, raise all children the same. Yeah, I guess that's something to get behind too. Yeah, okay. Well, great. I mean, listen, it's been a long conversation. I think I have to get dinner now because I'm sort of fatigued right now.
No worries. I think I'm gonna do the same.
Yeah, fun conversation. I think we both learned a lot. And if you ever want to have me on, I'm open to that. And I'll work on my phrasing. I've heard some people in chat.
Yeah, I think it is perfectly fine. But yeah, I really thank you very much for coming on. This is absolutely the most productive conversation I've had on my stream. A very stark departure from whatever happened last week.
That was great, Rose. I was pain. That was the guy slamming his desk, right?
That was the guy. I was like, bro, that guy.
Incredible. That was incredible. I didn't know that those people exist.
It was insane. I got some good content off it at least, so I'm fine with it. But I really appreciate again these more like intellectual, I guess, academic conversations. I feel like they're very nice to have. And then before we hang up, just for anyone else, if anyone else wants to have a conversation, talk to me about something, teach me about something, have a discussion, have a debate, whatever. The link to my Discord server is in the description. If you go in there, you're gonna see my my user Roserist. Shoot me a DM and we can set up to talk or set up to have a conversation or whatever, and that'll be greatly appreciated. But thank you very much for coming on here. This was really good. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Bye guys. Have a good one.
Bye bye.